Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Sunday Shot. I am your host, Joe Dyer, and today I'm actually beaming in from the lands of the mighty Kulin Nation here down in Melbourne. I am joined back in the fray today by my co-host, Dave Milner. Welcome, Dave.
G'day, Joe. Great to be back here. Can we do that again?
You can call me Jops. That's okay. No problem.
G'day. It's been a week. G'day, Joe. Great to be back here.
It's great to have you back from the mud and the tents of music festivals. We are delighted to have joining us today for his Sunday Shot debut, legend of the Australian media, Mr. Paul Bongiorno. Paul, welcome.
Legend.
Thank you for joining us on the Sunday Shot.
Oh, great to be here so far anyway.
Yeah, fantastic to have you. And joining us is favourite of us here at the Sunday Shot, coming back for another episode, is Ms. Rachel Withers. Rachel, welcome back.
Thrilled to be back.
Now, look, it's been a big week. In fact, so much has happened this week that things that happened early on in the week, like, Robert Kennedy Jr. saying that Tylenol causes autism has almost been forgotten in the mists of time already. We're not going to focus too much on that today because we're going to have Grace Tame joining us as a guest next week to talk about that in a bit more detail. But I thought before we get into Albo's adventures at the UN, we might just note a couple of things that happened later in the week, which for me are quite concerning from a geopolitical point of view. And the first was Trump's finally gone and done it, and that is to ensure that charges are being brought against, criminal charges are being brought against his political opponents. And we had James Comey, former director of the FBI, being charged, it seems notionally, for having misled Congress when he gave evidence about who leaked classified information in the US, Rachel. But it's not that we haven't been warned, but now he's finally done it. This does seem to be a fairly ominous step coming out of the US.
Yeah, it feels like bigger and bigger dominoes falling in this slide towards autocracy and fascism in the US. I mean, it has just been, I think this week alone has been enough alarming stuff for what feels like should have been 6 months worth of restrictions on free speech and madness, like, in terms of even just Trump's speech at the UN. Like, it feels like we are all descending into madness with him. But not a great time to be in the US. I'd say this is the point at which, if I was there, I'd be getting the hell out.
Yeah, look, I think. Sorry, go, Paul.
Well, it gives lawfare a new and ominous definition, really. Trump actually made the concept that he would pursue those who had pursued him if he won the election, and his obviously his voters, his cheer squad, well, they're cheering. But what we have is the President of the United States sooling onto someone who he perceives to be an opponent, the Attorney General of the United States, and already calling Comey corrupt, already consigning Comey to jail before the justice system has had a chance to play out. And I notice commentators are saying already he's made it easy for Comey's lawyers to defend him just on the notion of prejudice. But I really don't think that Trump cares. What he cares about is making life extremely uneasy, unhappy for Comey. This is going to cost Comey a hell of a lot of money to defend, even if Trump believes in the end he'll get off.
And so the three people that Trump had singled out as opponents that he wanted to pursue, harass, use lawfare, as you say, Paul, were Comey. So now charges have been laid. And interestingly, even the original Trump appointee in this sort of East Virginia, the AG in the East Virginia area, who is a full-on Trump supporter, Eric Siebert, he actually refused to bring charges against Letitia James, who is the second of the triumvirate, if you like. Letitia James was, of course, the Attorney General in New York who brought the charges against Trump for his fraudulent accounts of the value of his property portfolio. Trump was going after her for mortgage fraud, ironically in some ways. But Siebert actually said, look, there's no evidence here. I can't do it in good conscience. So he was fired and replaced by a very junior lawyer on Trump's personal legal team and former beauty pageant, actually, candidate Lindsay Halligan, who had no such qualms about bringing charges. And then the third person is actually Chuck Schumer, and it's a little bit unclear as to what they would actually try and charge Schumer with, apart from just generally being an opponent of Trump.
An ineffective opponent of Trump. I think they should keep Chuck Schumer where he is if they want to rule forever, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. But, Paul, as you say,
the other thing which is really, really dangerous is, as Rachel was saying, that what we're seeing is the great United States sliding, not even slipping, sliding into autocracy and the trashing of the courts and the judicial system. The use of the courts to pursue opponents, political opponents. This is the sort of thing America points to the Soviet Union or the old Soviet Union or Russia or China or any other communist dictatorship. It's sort of bizarre projection. The other point, I suppose, if you want to be really generous to Trump, you might say that in that distorted brain of his, what he's doing to these people and threatening to do and promising to do is what he believes they were trying to do to him. He believes, or he told his supporters, that in pursuing him, the Democrats and the agents of the criminal justice system in America were doing it for political reasons. Never mind that what he was charged with and what he was investigated for was in fact at face value treason, fraud, and other felonies.
And in fact, there are some people who say that the source of his antipathy to Zelensky was Zelensky's involvement back in that very first impeachment, where he refused to confirm Trump's view that Hunter Biden had been involved corruptly in the oil industry in Ukraine, and that Joe Biden had been basically using his influence as then vice president to enrich Hunter and the rest of the Biden family. So there's always, with Trump, it's like, they did it to me first. But in fact, of course, there was very good reason for Trump to be pursued as opposed to some of his opponents. Dave?
The politics in America has been completely undermined. It has become something that lacks any integrity or credibility.
Yeah.
I mean, I would argue that it sort of has for quite a while now, and this is just more overt than it used to be. I see this entire neoliberal period, I think in hindsight should be viewed as the death throes of a declining empire, and it's getting extremely violent. It's also just, run by a decrepit lord at this point. 2 quotes from his UN address. I'm really good at predicting things. Keep in mind, this is said to the UN General Assembly. During the campaign, they had a hat, a best-selling hat. Trump was right about everything. And I don't say that in a braggadocious way, but it's true. I've been right about everything. He hasn't been. And then another quote from Fox News later that night. This is in response to the escalator stopping, Trump nearly tripping over Melania. And in the assembly, he said, if the First Lady wasn't in great shape, she could have fallen, but she is in great shape. This is the President of the United States at the UN. And then later that evening, Fox News' Jesse Waters said, totally calm and regulated, They sabotaged them. They could have hurt the First Lady. Then they sabotaged the teleprompter. This is an insurrection. What we need to do is either leave the UN or bomb it. Wait, it's in New York though, isn't it, right? Like, that's the quote. This is just peak American nonsense.
Well, it was all happening in the UN this week in New York, although, of course, the Palestinian delegation weren't able to be there in person because they had been denied visas, which is it's in breach of the UN Charter, and the privilege that the US has of hosting the UN means that they are not allowed to, in theory, prevent national delegations or official delegations attending UN official business. But that, of course, has not ever stopped Trump. But things kicked off with the snappily named High-Level International Conference for the Peaceful Settlement of the Question of Palestine and the Implementation of the Two-State Solution, which was co-chaired by Saudi Arabia and France. Dave, you were watching what was going on with an eagle eye and have put together a little package for us of a lot of countries that were talking about the carnage in Gaza, not so much about recognition of Palestine, which we'll come to, but actually about stopping the war and sending in troops. So we'll go to that package first and then we'll come back.
Quite a bit to applaud last night in his address at the United Nations.
I love Europe. I love the people of Europe. And I hate to see it being devastated by energy and immigration. This double-tailed monster destroys everything in its wake.
We are going to stay with that speech because in a truth bomb designed to burst open the bunker of global bureaucracy and control that is the UN headquarters in New York, Donald Trump's speech last night didn't miss.
Global cooling will kill the world. We have to do something. Then they said global warming will kill the world, but then it started getting cooler, so now they could just call it climate change because that way they can't miss. It's climate change. Because if it goes higher or lower, whatever the hell happens, there's climate change. It's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, in my opinion.
I might add, he said at the top of the speech that his auto cue broke down, so much of this speech was without a note.
We have a border, strong, and we have a shape, and that shape doesn't just go straight up. That shape is amorphous when it comes to the atmosphere. Because the teleprompter is not working. I feel very happy to be up here with you, nevertheless, and that way you speak more from the heart. I can only say that whoever's operating this teleprompter is in big trouble. I ended 7 wars, dealt with the leaders of each and every one of these countries, and never even received a phone call from the United Nations offering to help in finalizing the deal. All I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle. If the First Lady wasn't in great shape, she would have fallen. But she's in great shape. We're both in good shape. We both stood.
Bragging.
If you don't get away from this green scam, your country is going to fail. And I'm really good at predicting things, you know. They actually said during the campaign they had a hat. The best-selling hat. Trump was right about everything. And I don't say that in a braggadocious way, but it's true. I've been right about everything. And I'm telling you that if you don't get away from the green energy scam, your country is going to fail. So beautiful is that each country is unique. But to stay this way, every sovereign nation must have the right to control their own borders. Proud nations must be allowed to protect their communities and prevent their societies from being overwhelmed by people they have never seen before with different customs, religions, with different everything. Where migrants have violated laws, lodged false asylum claims, or claimed refugee status for illegitimate reasons, they should, in many cases, be immediately sent home.
In 1947, Australia was proud to be the first member of the United Nations to vote for the plan that made the modern state of Israel possible. But that plan always encompassed 2 states, a state of Israel and a state of Palestine. living side by side within internationally recognised borders, recognising each other's right to live in peace and security, opportunities not taken, compromises rejected, good faith betrayed, a cycle of violence that has crushed generations. We saw that in the horrific events of October 7, 2023. Hamas terrorists descending on a festival promoting friends, love and infinite freedom to perpetrate atrocities. We stand with Jewish people everywhere who feel the cold shadow of history's darkest chapter in any act of anti-Semitism. Throughout this conflict, Australia has supported calls for a ceasefire because every innocent life matters. Every Israeli life, every Palestinian life. Right now, Gaza is in the grip of a humanitarian catastrophe, and the Israeli government must accept its share of responsibility. Tens of thousands of civilians have been killed. Desperate people, including children, denied vital aid. Aid workers killed, including Australian Zomi Frankham. Yesterday, Australia recognised the state of Palestine. We have been clear. The terrorist organisation Hamas can have no role in Palestine's future. Our recognition was predicated on commitments from the Palestinian Authority, reaffirming Israel's right to exist in peace and security, that Hamas turn over its weapons to Palestinian security forces and never controls Gaza again, and the PA must demilitarise, hold democratic elections and undertake wholesale reform. Working together, we can build a future where instead of children in Gaza dying in pain, living in fear or being taught to hate, they can go to school and build a life in larger freedom.
The moment Israel bombed 3 UN-run schools in Al-Shati refugee camp north of Gaza City, displaced Palestinians had been living in the classrooms. They say the Israeli military gave them little warning.
We took our things and put them outside. Minutes later, they started to bomb the school. We left with what we were wearing. Now I'm sitting in a tent and I have nothing for my children. No pillow, no blanket, nothing.
In another neighborhood, airstrikes targeted tents and temporary shelters. Palestinians say even if they follow the forced evacuation orders, they are still not safe.
Trump not only lets missiles fall on young people in the Caribbean, he not only imprisons and chains migrants, but he also allows missiles to be launched at children, young people, women, and the elderly in Gaza. He becomes complicit in genocide, because it is genocide, and we must shout it again and again. This chamber is a silent witness and an accomplice to a genocide in today's world. The young people killed by missiles in the Caribbean did not belong to the trendy Aragua. Perhaps nobody here even knows their names, nor to Hamas. They were from the Caribbean, possibly Colombians. And if they were Colombians, with apologies to those who dominate the United Nations, criminal proceedings should be opened against those US officials responsible, including the top official who gave the order, President Trump. Migration is an excuse for a rich, white, racist society to believe itself the superior race and to ignore that its leaders are taking it, together with all humanity, to the brink of its own extinction.
If and when the United Nations Security Council and this great assembly decide Indonesia is prepared to deploy 20,000 or even more of our sons and daughters to help secure peace in Gaza or elsewhere, in Ukraine, in Sudan, in Libya, everywhere when the peace needs to be enforced, peace needs to be guarded, we are ready. We will take our share of the burden, not only with our sons and daughters, we are also willing to contribute financially to support the great mission to achieve peace by the United Nations.
And let us proclaim in all seriousness and sincerity that we embrace personal and collective responsibility to uphold humanity, sustainable development and international law, because this will keep us together as a civilization for generations. And Madam President, let me end on a personal note. For the sake of future generations, to fulfill our responsibility as human beings, to ensure that we are on the right side of the history, we should do the right thing. We did not stop the Holocaust. We did not stop the genocide in Rwanda. We did not stop the genocide in Srebrenica. We must stop the genocide in Gaza. There are no excuses anymore. None.
Whilst the recognition of a Palestinian state is urgent, it is all the more urgent that there exist a Palestinian people in the state that we're claiming to recognise, and regrettably the Palestinian people are being annihilated. For this reason, in the name of reason, in the name of international law, and in the name of human dignity, we have to stop this slaughter now. At this precise moment, bombs continue to fall indiscriminately on the civilian population in Gaza. Hunger is killing women, older persons and children. Today, we take a crucial step forward in calling for a two-state solution at this conference. But let us be lucidly clear, there is no solution possible when the population of one of those two states is the victim of a genocide. We are all well aware that the only hope that civilians in Gaza have is that of knowing that the world does not forget them, and this conference nurtures that hope. It is an act of moral rebellion, an uprising against indifference and forgetfulness. Let us make this conference too a collective commitment to halting brutality and to paving the way for peace. Excellencies, this conference marks a monumental step forward, but it is not the end of the road. It only is and can only be the beginning. As such, I want to make two proposals. First, the State of Palestine must be a fully fledged member of the United Nations. As soon as possible, we must conclude the procedure to admit the State of Palestine to this organisation on an equal footing with the rest of states herein. Secondly, we have to immediately adopt measures to halt the brutality and make peace possible. Spain, of course, will adopt a plan with measures to halt the genocide in Gaza. We will continue to take brave measures shoulder to shoulder with anyone who wishes to join us, because Gaza needs it. Excellencies, history will judge us, and its verdict will be brutal with those that perpetrated this slaughter and with those who remain silent or turned a blind eye. We need to take a step forward so that reason can prevail, for diplomacy, for the respect for international law, for IHL, for common sense and the most basic values that we hold as humankind. Let us make the 22nd of September the day that we remember as the first major step forward. Today, more than ever before, we cannot be indifferent to injustice. Thank you.
So obviously, for a lot of countries, there's a lot more than just recognition of Palestine on the agenda, Dave.
There was. It showed, I think, who is very serious about this and who is obfuscating and kicking the can down the road. It's the thing about, I guess I've got a few things to say after watching all this week. The thing about recognizing the statehood of a pile of rubble and mass graves that you are contributing to creating is that it doesn't stop the genocide. It has very little political cost. We frame it here as though there is a political cost, but really it's just a bunch of crank emails from some angry lawyers. Why there isn't a political cost is because it doesn't stop Trump and Netanyahu's Gaza of the Riviera plans. Albanese, we're 2 years into this, he still can't call it a genocide. And there was one particular sentence that I found just incredibly distasteful. It's one of those things that on the surface sounds reasonable, but when you unpack it, is just a continuation of this imperial abusive gaslighting we've all suffered for 2 years. We can build a future where instead of children in Gaza dying in pain, living fear, or being taught to hate, they can go to school. Now, sounds sensible, but it's just blatantly insulting because all the schools have been blown up and they're not taught to hate. They grow up in a concentration camp and are routinely exterminated. And then the other aspect of this is the whole every accusation is a confession thing. Israeli historian Ilan Pappé in the early 2000s looked at Israeli education systems and determined that 20 years from now, we will have created a society of the most racist, violent, genocidal soldiers the world has ever seen. And sort of here we are. So I find Albanese's statement is it's designed to appear humane, but actually it's more cynical than anyone in the mainstream will let on. I think it's quite revolting, to be honest.
So, Rachel, it is this idea that there is some sort of political cost in recognising Palestine now. I mean, 153, so around 80% of the 193 member states of the UN, they all now officially recognise Palestine. So it's not a radical move, even though it clearly is designed to get some kind of momentum moving forward on the issue of a two-state solution.
Yeah, look, I was really struck, considering exactly what Dave said, what a non-action this was, and like a speech that actually committed nothing to doing anything to actually end the genocide, which is our, an obligation we have under international human law. But what was shocking to me was, despite the fact that this was such a nothing move and something that, most countries in the world already do, and we were doing it with a bunch of very mainstream Western allies, was how much the Murdoch media, and I should say the Kerry Stokes media, had an enormous tantrum over this. There were outrageous front pages earlier this week. Albo sells out Israel was the Adelaide Advertiser. That's News Corp in Adelaide. The Daily Telegraph, the worst, had hip hip Hamas. Once again, this was rewarding Hamas. But I've been really struck at how extreme the West Australian has actually been lately. Like I do pay a lot of attention to what these front pages say, because that is how many people get their news, just seeing the front pages, in the supermarket and not buying the paper. And the West Australian had Albo Gaga over Gaza, which is just like, sure, if you want to have a media outlet that wants to argue the line incorrectly, that this is not the correct order of things, sure, but take it seriously, like engage with this as a serious issue, a serious national decision we're making, not Albo Gaga over Gaza, which is, I think, possibly the worst front page I've seen from the West Australian, and there's been some doozies lately.
This is not a serious country. We are 2 years into a Holocaust. We have hundreds of thousands of kids murdered by our allies, and that's the headline?
Yeah, but I mean, no wonder Albanese, well, he should still be doing more, but no wonder, like, he thinks he's doing something quite big here, when it's the same as with climate. If he's being attacked from both sides, that must mean he's in the right place. He's somewhere really centrist and really moderate on this. And they are making him look like he's doing something when he's actually doing absolutely nothing. He's not doing Gaga over Gaza. He's kind of letting the genocide of Gaza continue.
Yeah. Can I come in? There is the immediate humanitarian disaster, the slaughter of men, women and children, which has been going on for 2 years and will continue until Netanyahu decides not to keep killing in the way he is. So that is the immediate humanitarian concern that is increasingly appalling most of the world, if not all of it. But I think we need to send, well, why is Albanese and the Australian government not coming out and attacking Netanyahu in the way they attack Putin? They're not waiting for the International Criminal Court to make a judgment that what Putin has done is illegal. They come out and say it is illegal. So you've got to say, well, why and what is happening? Now, in my view, the horrific last 2 years, since October 7, 2023, have completely unmasked the foundations of the legitimacy of the Jewish state of Israel. It
Entirely.
always was an imposition. It is an imposition of European settlers on Palestine and the Palestinians who were there. The original Nakba saw almost 1 million Palestinians dispossessed, their homes turned into rubble, bulldozed, and this has been the way it's going. Now, 10 years ago, David Cameron, the UK Prime Minister, was appalled when Netanyahu blockaded Gaza. He said it was an open-air prison. This is going on in the West Bank. Bethlehem, which is basically more Christian Palestinian than Muslim Palestinian, it's been similarly blockaded for the last 10 years. And people are saying how intolerable life is there. But what we are now seeing, and I don't think this is retrievable for Israel, Israel has become an international pariah. What is happening is, in geopolitical terms, while the United States of America is acting in the way it is, even with a lunatic, as a dangerous lunatic as president, while it is reacting in the way it is, as it were, a break on other nations, certainly allied nations. But another thing that is a bit disturbing, why didn't New Zealand, for example, join the other Five Eyes people in recognising the state of Palestine? I'll tell you why, because this is the hint of the culture wars that even Israel and Palestine has become, because the Luxon government, who's joined Albanese and Labor, the Labor government in Australia, condemning and calling for ceasefires, and that this was considered a political bridge too far, even this. So what I think, if there is any hope or light to come out of this, I do think that the world community is rethinking the politics and how to deal with Israel. And there is a suggestion that now that France, the UK, Canada, and even others more reluctant to join, if this keeps going on, Israel will be hit with the one thing that ended apartheid in South Africa, and that is financial sanctions. Financial sanctions will and do count. I heard some discussion along these lines the other night, and that would be something that would cripple Israel. Now, the other thing to say to you, and this is, I think, the fruits of the legacy, if you like, of what Australia, the UK, Canada, and France have done. Trump met with the Arab leaders yesterday in New York, and after that meeting, when they said, if you allow Israel to take over, the occupied territories, to annex them, that will make matters worse. It will not lead to peace in the region. Now, Trump's come out and said he will not allow it to happen. Now, that could be the beginnings of the fruits of the pushback from the rest of the world. It's something that will hopefully, fingers crossed if you like, keep a close eye on.
If I cross my fingers any tighter, that my hands are going to fall off after the last couple of years. I want to bring up a couple of quotes as well from the UN that I think are just speak to what you're talking about, Paul, and are just far more substantial than like the beauty pageant answer that we got from Albanese wishing for generic world peace. Finnish President Alexander Stubb said no single country should have a veto in the UN, and furthermore, a Security Council member should also lose its voting rights for a fixed period if it violates the UN Charter. This rubs to the core of the fact that when America is acting this imperial and murderous, the entire UN is broken. It cannot act against it because of the American veto power. We've also had some remarkable statements. President of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, said there is no superior race. There is no chosen people of God. It is neither the United States nor Israel. The chosen people of God is all of humanity. Lovely sentiment, and absolutely.
That's a basic element of the Catholic faith. As you know, I'm a Roman Catholic. But that's the Catholic, the whole world, right? that very point is that the whole world is God's chosen people. What in a more secular context as you're getting at, and I think as that president was getting at, that is the dignity of every human being.
Absolutely. And to further push the dignity of every human being, we've had Spain and Italy send naval ships to protect the Samud flotilla, which is headed towards Gaza, carrying citizens from 44 countries, 6 Australians, a doctor from my suburb, Dr. Bianca Webb-Pullman, and they now have naval support from global powers. The Australian government is not committed to any of this. The Americans haven't either. They are being droned by Israel overnight as we speak. And then the other thing that I think is very interesting, Indonesia has promised to send 20,000 troops to Gaza should other countries join them. And China has definitively said that Gaza belongs to the Palestinian people. They didn't say much, but when they say something, it's worth listening to.
Look, I think it is interesting. I mean, it does seem that on the ground, a Palestinian state has never been further away, really, with East Jerusalem annexed by Israel and the decade of expansion of Israeli settlements into the West Bank. And now, of course, just the total kind of carnage in Gaza. So on the ground, there's still an enormous amount of work to be done, but perhaps, Rachel, this is finally a turning of the tide.
Well, I guess it's felt like it should be a turning of the tide for some time now. But I will say I'm glad Dave brought those quotes to the table, because as someone who was following this very much through the Australian media, we weren't getting any of that. We were not getting, the international condemnation. We were getting, Gaga over Gaza and like horrible selfies of Trump and Albanese on the front page. Like everything here was so small-minded and through the lens of like, let's not upset Israel and let's not upset Trump. And it's so important that we get this meeting with Trump. And to not have been hearing what actually most of the world was saying is really sad. It's really sad that so much of how the Australian media covered this.
Rachel, can I ask you a question?
So minor.
Can I ask you a question? And as a much older Australian than you, what do your criticism, which I agree with completely, is of what we're seeing, if you like, in the legacy media in Australia. Yes. But I'm getting a lot of my stuff at my age from elsewhere. Now, do you accept that a hell of a lot of Australians like you and perhaps like the rest of us are also getting the bigger picture, because social media exists, but so does the internet exist, and it's just as accessible to read the New York Times as it is to read the Australian.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm certainly have constantly got much of my information on the conflict through my social media, but just in terms of the way that the Australian mainstream media covered the UN was so pathetic and pick me, and like Australia gave a speech and what did Albo say and
it was embarrassing
say about what Albo said. It wasn't actually about this global conference and the global conversation that was going on.
I would love to come out of this period not sort of hating my profession any more than I already do, and I'm just failing at that miserably right now. It's everything you've said, and you're right, Paul. We more mercifully, there are other alternatives, but again, like the oligarchical class own all these alternatives as well. We're going to need to get back to meeting in a park and getting bullhorns out.
Look, there is a commercial imperative for legacy media, and the old saying that a dog fight on Main Street is more important to locals than a famine in Africa. Because people will buy the paper. This is an old construct, but people will buy the paper to find out what the dog fight was about. In the main street of their town, and you might notice that a lot of the opinion polling in Australia is, well, what are Australians thinking about? What's their attitude? And even if you quibble with the way the questions are asked, it seems to come up with not quite a majority against what Israel is doing, or a plurality against it, but a huge number saying they don't know. And that means our politicians and our people who want to sell their media say, well, it's no good me going for broke on this because no one's going to watch me or read me or buy me,
But it's a cyclical problem because like that attitude is created by the type of media and the type of politicians that feel they can get away with obfuscating and talking about Gaga for Gaza instead of providing some sort of intelligence. It's this feedback loop that's just going to create a country of, I don't know, stunted racist people. And here we are.
To Ronnie Salt, friend of the Shot and contributor to the Shot, her article for the Shot this week, she was talking about the independent media conference that a lot of our broader colleagues attended, where an ABC representative said that they would often pick up stories from Google Trends. I mean, that just seems to me extraordinary in terms of the most craven way of following a story rather than leading on or breaking a story. And to say that explicitly, our ABC, like that seems to me to be jaw-dropping.
Well, the ABC's been under pressure to be commercial.
Yeah.
And this is the fruits of that. This is this whole idea that, no, we don't want the ABC to be serious anymore because that's woke and left wing.
Yeah, and that way we'll just...
And again, woke and left wing, it's not even a left-right thing for me anymore. It's people that have some clarity. It's people that have some clarity on how the world works, and then people that are trying to make people angry and excuse that. Yep. And I mean, it does go to the top with the ABC. We saw through the Latouche case, senior management just riddled with Zionist colonial mindsets, and they weren't willing to protect their reporter. It's so many of our institutions have shown themselves to just be rotten to the core for the last few years. Like our politics has been
very much afraid of consequences.
That's the key. And look, one of the things too, I think, if you want to analyse what's going on, and we have been talking about the media, one of the key differences, for example, between, say, the Jewish community in Australia and the Muslim community is that the Jewish community is the Australian establishment. It's at the top of the tree. It's educated. It's wealthy. It's in the big... It's in the big corporations. It has enormous clout and influence, and that itself gives it the sort of leverage that it's had and goes a long way to explain the fear because, for example, when you have conservative governments in Australia, they are more beholden to that to these sorts of realities and have been imposing themselves, as we know, on the ABC every chance they get. Now,
and that stands in stark contrast to the Jewish Council, the progressive group of Jews opposed to the conflict in Gaza, who never get a run.
They are a fringe minority of the Jewish community. That's
apparently.
Someone quite important in one of my outlets told me when I wanted to quote them. But there you go.
Really?
Well. Yes, there was another big hit piece on the Jewish Council of Australia this week suggesting that that they weren't a serious organisation. Yes. And this is by the same outlet that pulled an advertisement from the Jewish Council of Australia declaring, exactly, we are Jews against the genocide.
The Jewish Council is so dangerous to Zionism because it destroys the myth that this is all of us. This is the Jewish religion doing this. The Jewish Council and, well-known Americans, Naomi Klein, Gabor Mate, Chomsky, these are the people that destroy that myth for Zionism, and that's why they just get attacked mercilessly by Zionists.
Well, they're completely within the terrific legacy of Jewish intellectuals.
Absolutely.
And the enormous contribution Jewish intellectuals over the decades, over the centuries, have actually made.
Can we return our gaze to the UN and perhaps some of the other issues that were being raised by the international community in contradistinction, I guess, to the unhinged rant of President Trump? I think apart from his, whinging and bitching about escalators not working and teleprompters on the blink, which were apparently, by the way, both caused by his team. But as you say, that's not going to stop Fox News suggesting that the UN should be bombed as a result of that. But he did devote a big chunk of I think it was 45 minutes overtime that he went with his speech to debunking the great hoax of climate change, which at the same time as, the rest of the UN is really trying to galvanise the international community. We even had China coming out for the first time saying that it was going to cut in real terms, admittedly by a very modest amount, but it is nonetheless still quite momentous that for the first time China said that it was going to cut its emissions, not increase them anymore, but a real cut. Now, China accounts for nearly a third of the world's total emissions, more than twice that of the US. So, Rachel, this does seem to be an important moment again, even if we could certainly argue that it's too little too late.
Yeah, an important moment, but it's, I think, disappointing, just to bring it back to Australia, that we weren't there actually promising to do something real and actually being leaders. I mean, Albanese likes to get up and say, much like his rhetoric around recognising Palestine, we're doing this, we're taking this seriously, when actually our own target contradicts that message. So I think it was just a shame, such a missed opportunity really for us to have been up there trying to be leaders in this space, which is exactly what this government wants to be thought of as. I see so many parallels between climate and Palestine because, again and again, the words are said and the action isn't behind it. But they're such nice words, aren't they?
I have a theory on why this keeps happening with this government, political theory. Bear with me for a moment. And it's that centrism it's liberalism. And what it is, it's committed to two things, human rights and capitalism. And those two things are fundamentally at odds with each other because capitalism somewhere right now is colonizing, massacring, exploiting, wage slaving, doing these things to human rights. So you just have these governments that are caught between the two things they believe in. They are deeply committed to solving the problems of the other thing they're deeply committed to. It's time wasting.
Richard Dennis has written a book which would agree with your sentiments and gives it a bit more flesh. So
no, absolutely. We had Richard on the show talking about that book.
Yeah.
We did.
But I think
can I make a point? Just picking up on what Rachel said, if we're disappointed with Australia's targets, and there's plenty of reasons to be, when we get to the United Nations, it's amongst the more ambitious, in inverted commas. Another thing, this is a bit interesting, picking up on your point, Joe. So 7 to 10% cut that China brought to the table. In 2023, China emitted 126 gigalitres of pollution. So if it delivers on its promise, it'll deliver a cut of 1.26 gigalitres. Now, if we deliver on our 70%, we will cut by 428 megalitres.
Right.
So that just gives you a bit of perspective on actually what China brought to the table is not to be sneezed at. The other thing I heard Arthur Wins from Melbourne University, who's an expert in this area, there is a view which is supported, I presume, on evidence that scientists have that I don't, that China's emissions, in fact, have peaked in the last 12 months. Which is one of the reasons why China is now making these promises. And that is, a slither of light, hopefully. Probably too late, but there you go.
Look, I think there is cause for some hope that China is sort of stepping up. Now, whether or not it is also seeking to do this as a sort of a political ploy and wedge to distinguish itself as a global leader, in contradistinction to Trump and the US, who knows? But it certainly is demonstrating that in that kind of bipolar sort of argument and struggle that's going on for potential global leadership. I mean, it is America which is slipping down the food chain and is no longer acting as a serious player in global politics.
I mean, he plugged his merchandise range and his wife's butt Like, why should we take him that serious then?
It's like kind of crazy. And I guess also what was discussed at the UN General Assembly this week, and again, another area where America is just not a serious player, is Russia's increased provocation in Europe around the invasion of airspace of NATO countries beyond just Ukraine. We've now seen Danish airports have to close. We've seen drones enter Estonia, Poland and Romania. We've had jets being scrambled by these countries against Russia. We even had Trump, after a meeting with Zelensky, saying that he would have some sympathy for NATO shooting down Russian jets if they continue to behave in this provocative way. Rachel, do you think this is a deliberate strategy of provocation on the part of Russia, and they seem to be being cavalier about possible consequences? I mean, Article 4, I think, of consultations of NATO has already been enacted, and Article 5 would be action being taken by NATO on behalf of one of its fellow members.
Yeah, look, I mean, it does seem like deliberate provocation, but what I find really alarming is that every time Donald Trump says something on this, he seems to have flipped completely from one side to the other. It does very much seem like whoever he spoke to last, you know, having just spoken to Zelensky. And next time he speaks to Putin, it's going to go back the other way. So I just don't think America is someone to be taken seriously or relied upon here.
No, but I think but in terms of what Europe's response might be at this point, is that it does seem to be a sort of steady escalation in a way that NATO itself, excluding America, will have to take seriously.
You would hope so.
The other thing to remember is that the United States, US Army, Europe, USARA, as they call it, there are thousands of American troops in Europe as part of their NATO commitment. And if Trump isn't signalling that they'll be available to defend Europe, it makes you wonder where they're at. You know, I mean, it is true that the Europeans have sat back and said, "Oh, look, 20,000 US troops in Poland or whatever it is, some huge number. Well, why do we need to have any more troops?" You know, but now, of course, there is a mad scramble. But maybe Putin sees that this is perhaps the chance to be as provocative and maybe do a bit more because he's making the judgment that with Trump as president, NATO is nobbled.
Another of the events that was sort of happening in the sidelines of the UN was for Australia to take centre stage was the Protecting Children in the Digital Age event, which was giving Australia a chance to tout the upcoming ban on social media for under 16-year-olds. And it did get like quite a lot of interest, particularly from the UN. We had kind of Ursula von der Leyen there really talking it up, saying the eyes of the world will be on Australia, watching and seeing how this plays out. And there was actually one UN official who was quoted as saying, after listening to Emma Mason, who was the mother of young girl Tilly, who took her own life, who died by suicide after online bullying. This UN official saying it was the first time he'd ever been to a UN event where the content had actually changed his mind on a subject. So despite the fact that there is some scepticism back here about whether or not this can even work at all technically, on the international stage, this idea that you know, the unfettered power of the social media and tech companies is a bad thing, gave it some credibility. Rachel, did you follow any of that at all?
A little bit. I mean, I was mostly feeling embarrassed that the one thing that we were getting any praise for on the international stage was this populist, reactionary, half-baked idea. Obviously...
You're a stirrer,
Rachel. Seriously, though. It really was taken seriously.
It was taken seriously. And, you know, I think this is an idea that obviously has a lot of salience with parents, not just in Australia, but all over the world. And that's why it is a bipartisan position that was taken. But I just, having followed especially Cam Wilson's coverage in Crikey, all the holes in this concept and in the actual enforcement of it, I was so aghast that was the thing that we were being known for at the UN, was this policy.
Yeah, but Annika Wells made a special trip over, even though she presumably has things she should have been dealing with back here with the Office.
I thought she was going to go, and then she popped up in some pictures.
Yeah, no, I think she just basically delayed her trip by a day and still wanted to go there for the sidelines protecting children in the digital age session, as it was called. Also there, of course, was Chris Bowen, who was talking up Australia's climate change credentials, but he seemed to be mainly being there, Paul, I think, to lobby Turkey to try and get them or to drop their bid to host COP31 so that Adelaide can take the spoils. But to date, Albanese wasn't able to get a meeting with Erdogan, and so it was basically Bowen talking to Emin Erdogan, the wife of the Turkish leader. So not at the moment, there still seems to be an absolute deadlock. Turkey and Australia are both committed to holding COP31, which means it will default back to Bonn.
There was a suggestion that a way out of the impasse would be to split COP31 between Australia and the Pacific and Turkey. Turkey is feeling a bit miffed. Mrs. Erdogan apparently is an environmentalist with some clout in Turkey, and they can't believe that they're the ones that should always be, in their view, pushed aside. So that'll be interesting to see if some sort of compromise has been reached. Look, I frankly don't think whether it's held in Australia or Turkey or Bonn in Germany makes any difference. What we really need is substance. And what we really need is all the parties to actually start doing something.
This isn't about hosting a Grand Prix or an exhibition centre thing. And, the fact that she is a staunch environmentalist, it's probably why they didn't get it. That's probably why they won't get it. You need to be a corrupt petro-fossil fuel state to host these things. So I think we should probably host it. We do a good job in that measure.
But it is also where, the fact that we keep flouting our Pacific neighbours. I mean, they remain entirely exercised that Australia is not doing enough. And so whilst we can have targets for our own emissions, while we don't count any of the Scope 3 emissions, and we continue. I mean, Vanuatu explicitly stated that the approval of the expansion of the Northwest Shelf was a betrayal of the Pacific, and it is talking out of both sides of our mouth to say, here we are, a climate leader. We believe in renewable energies at the same time as we are, as Dave says, like a kind of appalling petro state, continuing to just export these huge amounts of fossil fuels, burning them here in order to get them ready for export and then sending them off for export. I don't see why we think we've earned the right to host COP31, Rachel.
You're not cynical enough, Joe. That's why we have the right to own it.
Well, you'd think if they were really serious about wanting this bid, and, as everyone has said here, does it really matter where it's held? But if they really, really wanted to win this standoff, I mean, put something bold on the table in terms of climate action. Like, make some sort of big commitment that could be the centerpiece of such a thing. They're not really acting like a government that particularly wants to be a world leader on this. They're not sticking their head above the parapet. They're doing the bare minimum. Maybe do something, and then it'll look like it should obviously go to you guys.
Look, there's a lot of relativity in politics, and maybe I've been covering it for too long. And it is true that we've got, under Labor, we've got a better narrative than the Liberals had. But it's more than that, actually. Labor is doing a lot more than its political opponents were doing, or even now in opposition are tearing themselves apart about not wanting to do. So I mean, I think that that in having this discussion, and I think it's very necessary that voices or opinions that have been voiced in the last few moments are heard and are pushed, and that's what the Greens are doing, that's what the Teals are doing, and that's the only sort of pressure that will get more action. I've read a book quite recently written by a German economist on how we're failing the planet and therefore ourselves, and he makes the point that the whole argument over climate change is riddled with vested interest, and within each bubble of vested interest there is rationality. I mean, if you own a coal mine, it's rational for you to defend the coal mine, so how do we break this? Because it's the vested interest of Australia as a nation, fossil fuel exporting nation, that have us where we are. The only thing that will break it will be people power. The only thing that will break it will be people who are angry and say, I'm not voting for you. Now, I've had this discussion with various Liberals and Nationals over the years, and they note, especially the ones from Queensland and WA, they say to me, well, people in Sydney and Melbourne don't even know where gas comes from, or don't even know what's powering their electricity, whereas we're up here in Rockhampton or wherever, and it's our livelihood doing it. So that's the vested interest thing. But the point has got to be that that the motivation for voters, not only in Sydney and Melbourne, but in the other capitals, is that they've got to say enough is enough. We want more done. And then the challenge for the Labor government or a government that's minded to do more is how to do it without destroying economically Australia in the short term.
As opposed to the long term, not doing anything. I mean,
well, no, the long term, I agree. It's all overread.
The short term is getting very present today.
I agree with you completely.
It's staggering, though, that
analysis.
I wish that the coalition, being an absolute basket case on this issue, more now than ever, would open up the floor for the Albanese government to be brave and to go, well, they're not really going to challenge us at this point. They're so far off to the right. But instead, they're very, very comfortably straddling the centre. They're like, well, they've cleared off, so we can occupy the most middle ground centrist position and still win a large majority. And yeah, Paul, as you say, it's going to take people power to change that. The last election wasn't necessarily a huge step forward for independents or Greens, but nor was it necessarily a huge slide backwards. But yeah, I think the longer Labor spends in the centre, the more the real left is going to grow.
Yeah. And by the way, the centre is this space where they have built the Northwest Gas Shelf, this horrific project that is just cooking all of our emissions reductions efforts across the ball. So, I mean, this idea of a centre, we really do need to reconceptualise it.
I do
it's
want
just,
to...
It's still the same thing as the right, but just with softer PR and more convincing propaganda.
I do want to just spend a little bit of time on the ongoing chaos in the coalition. They don't deserve much more than a smidge of time, but it is kind of extraordinary and in its own way hilarious what is going on, because they seem determined to learn none of the lessons of the last election. And I find it kind of extraordinary but interesting, the position that Andrew Hastie has been adopting in the last couple of weeks. He is a sort of a disciple of Tony Abbott, so perhaps we shouldn't be surprised. But for someone who wants to position themselves as a future leader of the party, I think that there's 2 points that I'd like perhaps both Paul and Rachel to address. The first is, why does he think it's a good idea to have come out against net zero so strongly, given everything that happened to them at the last election? This does seem to be the losing wicket. A very small minority of Australians support that position. So why is someone who had been touted as sort of the great white hope sort of tarnishing his prospects, if you like, by adopting such a small, hard right kind of position? And then secondly, why has he come out this early? Like, if he didn't put his hat in the ring for the leadership after the last election, because we all know that whoever steps in, Brendan Nelson style, is unlikely to be the one to lead right through to the election. Why is he agitating in this way, in a way which may make his position on the front bench moving forward untenable? Any thoughts?
I think the answer to both of those questions is that he's an ideological zealot. Like, this is a guy who believes in the MAGA right. And I think there has been a couple of good pieces in the last couple of days actually looking into his views, not just, the car stuff, which was hilarious, but, his ideas about faith and Western civilization and things like that. He speaks like a American right-wing influencer, and he's posting like one, posting some really weird stuff. I was looking into the fact also that he, and this was something that was raised a lot when he was first up, he ran in a by-election in 2015, is that he is from a very, very fundamentalist religious Christian background as well. And there's been I think a series of pieces touching on that in the last couple of days. But I think he really believes in whatever direction he wants to take the Liberal Party, whether or not that is an electorally feasible one. I think he genuinely holds these wacky beliefs. I mean, I was really struck, when he first put his head above the parapet sometime last week or the week before. And I was really struck, he's a young-ish man. He's 42. And I was looking at the fact that a lot of these, there's a lot of men in the Liberal Party who are young, on the younger side, who are the ones trying to drag it to the right, not the ones who are trying to modernise it. And yeah, someone pointed out on Blue Sky, he's like a religious, will I say nut job? Yeah. He's a more extreme Christian than Scott Morrison was. And we know we had so many problems trying to talk about Scott Morrison's religion.
Yeah.
But he is from, his father was a reverend in the Creation Ministries International, which promotes creationism. And he has never disavowed that, whenever he was asked about it during his election. And someone suggested, he doesn't care about climate because he's waiting for the rapture. So I think he might be waiting for the rapture.
When's the next one scheduled?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. To me, there is no. I mean, I was talking to someone who's involved in the independence movement, intimately involved, and they're quite flummoxed about the whole thing, because if you do have someone like Hastie taking up a leadership position, or even coming into even more open warfare with the current leader, Susan Lead, how does the centre of that party hold? How do they continue as a united, cohesive party when they are tearing each other to shreds? Does this signal a potential existential threat for the future of the Liberal Party here? Could we not even have a Liberal Party by the time we get to the 28 election, let alone the 31?
Well, I think that's a distinct possibility if you get the ideological right, the ideological religious right, and Rachel's completely on the ball when not only is Hastie come from a family of religious creationist fundamentalists, but they are then in lockstep with the Christian right in America, which is fundamentally misogynist on women's procreative rights, abortion, and also this whole idea of the European Christian cultural heritage. They've got the wrong country if they think they're going to get anywhere with that, because don't forget what helped kill Tony Abbott in the end was the Catholic what was it, Captain Catholic tag, and what always had Morrison under the pump was the fact that he was a happy clapper, and which he tried to hide for a while. In the end, he gave up on that and invited the cameras in. But look, Hastie is filling the vacuum that Susan Lee has created. It's just crazy that we have no firm policies because we're looking at everything. But one of the problems is the new media, when you've got 24/7 news channels that put Liberals and Labor or left and right on all their panels 3 or 4 times a day and into the night, you're being asked. First of all, you're given the status of an alternative government, even though you don't deserve it because you've got nothing to offer, but you're given that status, and then you've got to get out there and say and do something. So Hastie has jumped into this vacuum. He hasn't given Susan Lee the excuse to sack him because he's backing her 100%, and this has got nothing to do with leadership. It may have something to do with the leadership policy-wise, but that's all right because there aren't any policies, Look, Hastie is, a very presentable-looking guy, although I was talking to a couple of older Liberals today over lunch, and one of them said, look, have a look at him. He's a trained killer. And when he's on television, have a look at those eyes,
Yeah.
So anyway, I've got to say that there was one thing I was really quite shocked about, which I can share with you. I was talking to one of the Labor people yesterday, and they said, look, we're a bit worried about. I said, I don't think our people, he said to me, realise that this idea of Hastie standing in front of the 1980s Ford Falcon, I think it was, and talking about manufacturing, making things in Australia, and then also combining that with this migration stuff, that is a very potent political base mix. But it's interesting from a couple of things. What he's doing is completely rejecting the IPA in Melbourne's idea of libertarianism and neoliberal economics, which after all drove Joe Hockey to basically tell the car manufacturers to piss off. Well, Hastie seems to be turning that completely on its head and going back to an economic prescription that was more apposite in the 1950s. And it was interesting to see Tony Burke the other day saying that it looks like Hastie, wants to take us all back to the future. But having said that, however, this is the sort of populist policy that can appeal, to quite a number of voters.
Well, it's worked in the US. The protectionism, the taking us back. It has worked. Dutton obviously wasn't the right salesperson, but you're right, Hastie does present a genuine threat for a right-wing movement.
Someone will come along that's more presentable and more competent than Dutton to spearhead these horrific authoritarian push, and I think Hastie has positioned himself for the future where the American order keeps rolling on. This is his politics very much so, and if that becomes the new world order for a little while, he will be positioned quite well to scoop up votes.
Well, look, we'll see. It was interesting that for the very first time in the Fin Review's power list, the Leader of the Opposition did not feature. That is a first. They've always managed to scrape their way in, but actually, perhaps even more tellingly, that there was really no opposition figures from anywhere, be it the Greens, be it the Teals, be it the crossbench, because it's all Labor at the moment, kind of dominating both covert and overt power lists. Look, we are coming to the end of another episode, unbelievably. I'm going to give everybody an opportunity for a top tip. My top tip, but I'm actually going to make it something slightly more than a top tip. I think it warrants noting specifically that this week, dropping on SBS, is the documentary The People versus Robodebt. If you haven't watched it yet, you can watch all 3 episodes at once. And it is a really powerful documentary that just reminds us anew what an horrific thing was unleashed by the Morrison government on the most vulnerable people in our community, that literally resulted in deaths and much despair beyond that. And yet, to date, not a single person has been held accountable for any of it. We don't know what's going on with the NAC investigation. They were given a second chance to get it right, and we don't know where things stand with that. So I think hopefully this series will unleash another round of agitation from the people to the government and to the NAC as to what the hell is going on, because it was such a sad and sorry time in Australian political and cultural life. That's my top tip. Rachel, anything from you?
I have just been noticing in the last 24 hours a few members of parliament, ex-moderate Liberals, starting to break their silence just a little bit over this hasty stuff. Amanda Vanstone has given Hasty a bit of a spray, and Arthur's seen it as well. I guess I'm predicting and also hoping that this might be the beginning of the moderate wing of the Liberal Party, or what's left of it, because I tried to make a list the other day of who in Parliament is moderate. It is a very, very short list, but perhaps...
And Giselle Capitarian won't be joining them, just worth noting that's finally been resolved.
She has withdrawn her challenge, yes. And, even the ones who are there don't really seem up to the fight, but perhaps some of these former heavyweights are coming out to fight for the soul of the party. Not holding my breath, but I do think that would be currently this battle for the soul of the party seems entirely one-sided. You've got your Sky News talking heads. Look, Amanda Vanstone, incredibly problematic legacy, but her coming out and Arthur Senior's coming out felt big.
Yeah, look, that's interesting. I mean, some of the former moderates like Christopher Pyne are too busy earning lots of money off the back of AUKUS, perhaps to devote it to the soul of the party. But it is good that Amanda is. Paul, is there anything that's been catching your eye or that you'd like to highlight for the week ahead?
Well, I'm going to be very mundane and say that the Reserve Bank interest rate or monetary policy board, which meets on Monday and on Tuesday will tell us what it's decided, will keep interest rates on hold at 3.6%. But I'm saying that we could well see an interest rate cut in December, bringing it down to about 3.4%. So, yes, that's my prediction. Which is a very short-term prediction. And that's mundane, except if you're a borrower and have a mortgage.
Yeah, no, I think it will be a big impact on lots of people. So we shall see in the next 24, 48 hours as to whether or not that's right. And Dave, finishing up with you, anything you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, I guess a point on the flotilla that didn't get across earlier, and people should be focusing on it. It really is the center of the geopolitical world right now. They are not just trying to get in there and drop some aid off. They are actually trying to establish a beachhead on the coast of Gaza, a permanent beachhead that creates a humanitarian corridor for countries to keep shipping aid into Gaza, breaking the blockade. So this is actually quite a significant development. And the addition of the Spanish and Italian Navy, this is really geopolitical temperature boiling stuff, and you should pay attention to it. It's very important. Cheers.
Okay, well, we will all keep our eyes on that. As ever, to you, our audience, thank you for joining us on the Sunday Shot. If you're so inclined, as ever, I'm going to ask you to throw a few dollars our way to keep us on air. We're here week in, week out, and we'd love to keep doing that for you and for the sake of independent media. And we look forward to joining you again next week on the Sunday Shot.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Thanks so much, Paul. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.